The case of Kelly Dwyer. Kelly Dwyer was born in 1986 in Lincolnshire, a suburb of Chicago. Her parents divorced when she was 16, but they remained close to her. The divorce had a significant impact on Kelly's life. A year after her parents' divorce, Kelly graduated from high school without a clear plan for her future. To delay her decision to go to college, she worked part-time at a local restaurant. 6 years later, in 2008, Kelly, then 22, moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin to start afresh. She enrolled in college, became a yoga instructor, and found a job as a saleswoman to cover her living expenses. She also worked as a nanny to earn extra income. Kelly often visited trendy places around town, creating memorable experiences. When she met her father a month ago, she was living in Milwaukee, and her life was going well. At that time, Kelly was a successful yoga instructor and a popular employee at a sports store. Kelly seemed content with her life, enjoying her job and a year-long relationship with Chris Zacco, a 38-year-old IT manager for a transportation company. Chris had graduated from Boston University in 2009 with a degree in international business and had moved from New York City to Milwaukee for work. He was a hard-working, decent man from a good family who shared Kelly's interests in sports and entertainment. Kelly and Chris seemed to get along well. Chris had built a successful career, owned a luxury apartment, an expensive car, and a large fortune that he had earned himself. Kelly's father approved of him, seeing him as a great match for his daughter. On October 12, 2013, Kelly was nowhere to be seen at work. She was well liked for her punctuality and work ethic, so this struck everyone as odd. Her colleagues tried to contact her, but her cell phone was silent. She was also inactive on social media. Kelly had never left her phone behind before. She simply disappeared, and her loved ones contacted the police to file a missing persons report. However, during the investigation into Kelly's disappearance, detectives found no evidence of enemies or individuals who might want to harm her. All of her belongings were still at home, so police ruled out the possibility that she left voluntarily. What was concerning was that her bank account, phone, and other accounts had no activity. Police suspected that Kelly was in trouble. Since Chris was the last person to see her on October 10, 2013, investigators brought him in for questioning. Chris stated that he and Kelly spent time at his apartment in Lafayette Towers, then went to a nearby bar, socialized, and drank. They returned to his apartment around 2:30 a.m., had a good time, and went to bed. At 9 a.m., Kelly left Chris's apartment, and they never saw each other again. Chris insisted that Kelly was not his girlfriend, saying they had an open relationship. He also revealed that he was in love with someone else and had plans for a future with her. This raised suspicions among investigators, who found Chris's story plausible but noted inconsistencies in his words and actions. To investigate further, detectives interviewed friends who had been with Kelly and Chris the night before Kelly went missing. These friends confirmed that the group had a good time at a bar and then ordered pizza, eating it on a bench outside. Kelly seemed to be in a good mood, sharing her plans for the next day, which included sleeping in, doing yoga, doing laundry, and relaxing. Chris and Kelly left for his apartment that night, where they met another friend who had been invited over for drinks. This friend reported feeling uncomfortable in Chris's apartment because she sensed tension between Chris and Kelly. She recalled that Chris was smoking and chatting with her while Kelly seemed upset. Assuming that Kelly was just tired, the friend thought little of it and left the apartment. However, after talking to Kelly's other friends, investigators discovered that Chris and Kelly were not on good terms. Kelly loved Chris very much, but unfortunately, Chris seemed uninterested in their relationship. Chris did not make any long-term plans involving Kelly, which worried her. Kelly's friend, missing, suspected that Chris was being unfaithful and that their relationship would not last. As a result, Kelly lost hope for a future with Chris and began to look for other options. She created a profile on a dating website and started chatting with various men, but she had yet to meet any of them in real life. Kelly's intention was to have a backup plan in case things did not work out with Chris. Additionally, her friends noticed bruises on Kelly's arms and neck and asked her about them, but Kelly dismissed their concerns by downplaying the situation. Her friends suspected that the bruises may be a sign of domestic violence, but Kelly never confirmed their suspicions. Meanwhile, investigators analyzed security footage from Chris's home. The footage showed Kelly and Chris coming home drunk one night, but Kelly was never seen leaving the apartment. This contradicted Chris's testimony that Kelly left his home at 9 a.m. the next morning. It was later discovered that another friend of Chris's was at the apartment that night and admitted to using illegal drugs with Chris. Detectives obtained a search warrant for Chris's apartment and found numerous drugs, pills, pipes, and other paraphernalia, leading to Chris's arrest for possession. They also discovered a torn shower curtain that appeared to have been forcefully removed. During questioning, Chris remained calm and admitted to using drugs but denied distributing them. A search of his cell phone revealed disturbing content, including photos of an unconscious girl in bed and a video of Chris raping the girl, who appeared to have been strangled. This led to suspicions that Chris had drugged and exploited her. Evidence from Chris's phone was linked to Kelly's disappearance. Police returned to Chris's apartment with a dog, which responded to the bed and bathroom area before leading them to the front door. The dog then guided police to Chris's car in the parking lot and to a nearby dumpster. The investigation reached a critical stage when investigators believed Kelly had been murdered. Kelly's boyfriend, Chris, became the prime suspect, as evidence suggested he was the last person to see her alive. It was believed that he spent time with Kelly in his apartment before secretly moving her body into his car, a plan that would have escaped the building's 28 surveillance cameras. During the investigation, police analyzed Chris's computer and discovered child pornography. This led to Chris being charged with possession of the images, but he was released on bail and was awaiting trial. The investigation continued as authorities attempted to find Kelly's body and gather enough evidence to build a stronger case against Chris. It should be noted that Chris had claimed to be in a long-term relationship with a woman, and investigators quickly began gathering information about that woman. The investigation uncovered the identity of a woman named Megan, with whom Chris had been secretly in a 3-year relationship, unbeknownst to Kelly, similar to the relationship he had with Kelly. Police came to interview Megan and showed her photos of Chris' apartment. After a thorough inspection, Megan found several items missing, including a shower curtain in the bathroom, a rug, several towels, and a large golf bag that was usually kept in the bedroom. Detectives believed Kelly could fit in the large bag Megan reported missing. After examining the building's entrances and exits, police found a side path that Chris could have taken to get to his car without being seen by surveillance cameras. Reviewing footage from the parking lot cameras, Chris was seen arriving at the house with the large bag, which he placed in the trunk of his car. At 10:06 a.m. on October 11th, Chris left the house in his car. Just 2 minutes later, at 10:08 a.m., Kelly's phone lost connection at the same location. Over the next 8 hours, footage captured Chris making multiple trips between his home and his car, loading up on belongings before leaving for good at 6:16 p.m. Chris did not return home until the next day. When investigators asked him what he had been doing the previous day, he said he was moving his summer sports gear to his mother's house. However, no one found this explanation credible. Chris was supposed to meet Megan at 7:30 that evening, but he arrived more than an hour late. Detectives suspected that he was looking for a place to dispose of Kelly's body, which would explain his delay. Unfortunately, they were unable to track his movements because his phone had been turned off since the morning. As an IT expert, Chris would have known that his phone records could be used to track him. Megan reported that Chris seemed very strange that night. He appeared restless and anxious, and he said that his phone was not working, which was why he was late. After the date, Megan and Chris went to Megan's apartment, where they spent the night. According to Megan, Chris was extremely stressed, had not slept at all, and was sweating so much that she had to change the sheets in the morning. Investigators believed that Chris was worried because he still had Kelly's body in the trunk of his car and was afraid of being discovered. He was trying to find a place to hide her body. On the morning of October 12th, Chris said goodbye to Megan and left after trying to convince her to temporarily move to Denver, but she refused. Police tracked Chris's location history using his car's GPS, which led them to a cheese shop called Cheese House, 80 miles from Milwaukee. However, it seemed unlikely that Chris would have driven that far just to buy cheese. Chris claimed that he had bought cheese for his parents, presenting a receipt for the cheese at 9:55 a.m. on October 12th, which his parents confirmed. However, the police found it difficult to believe Chris's story, as the same cheese could easily be purchased at a nearby supermarket. They suspected that Chris might have dumped Kelly's body in the area around the cheese store. Further investigation revealed that on his way back, Chris stopped at a sports store and bought new sneakers that afternoon. Detectives suspected that Chris had deliberately discarded his old shoes, possibly to avoid leaving blood or footprints that could be linked to the crime scene. It appeared that he had carefully planned to destroy evidence and create an alibi for himself. Chris, with his analytical mind, had tried to commit the perfect crime. However, investigators were able to spot inconsistencies in his story. Notably, it took him over 2 hours to travel from the cheese house to the sports store, a distance of about 80 kilometers, when it would normally take only an hour. This significant time difference suggested that Chris spent an additional hour on another activity, possibly hiding the body. Police speculated that he may have dumped the body along the way. However, the exact location of the body remained unknown. With a large search area spanning 50 miles, finding the body proved to be a huge challenge. A roadside search eventually led to a discovery. In a wooded area approximately 37 miles from the city, a local resident found human remains while walking. Upon discovery, the resident immediately contacted the sheriff's office. Dental records confirmed the remains were those of Kelly Dwyer. This discovery finally ended Kelly's parents' long and agonizing search for their daughter. The next step was to secure justice by determining the exact cause of her death. Based on available information, the medical examiner believed she may have been strangled but not forcefully enough to fracture the hyoid bone. There was no direct evidence at the scene where Kelly's body was discovered, such as torn curtains, mats, towels, or bags. However, the position of the skeleton provided valuable insight. The body was found face down, with one arm trapped underneath and the legs bent in a way that suggested it had been hidden for some time after death. This finding further supported the theory that Kelly's body had been hidden in a golf bag, as evidenced by footage of Chris holding the bag and driving into the area where the body was discovered. While these findings were compelling, they were circumstantial and did not directly implicate Chris in Kelly's murder. Ultimately, it took 5 years for Chris to be formally charged in connection with Kelly's disappearance. The charges against him were manslaughter and concealment of a body, as investigators lacked specific evidence to prove intent. Theorizing about the events of that night, detectives speculated that Chris and Kelly had become intimate, but Chris got carried away with strangulation, leading to Kelly's death. The investigation revealed that Chris then ripped off the shower curtain, removed the rug and towels, wrapped Kelly's body, placed it in a bag, thoroughly cleaned the house, and disposed of it. Throughout the ordeal, Chris maintained his innocence in Kelly's murder. Key evidence was presented at Chris' trial, including CCTV footage, cell phone video of the strangulation, and the search of his apartment by a dog. Megan, who testified against Chris, reported that he was extremely anxious on the day of the incident and was late for a meeting. Additionally, Chris' former girlfriends took the stand, expressing their concerns about his unhealthy obsession with strangulation and rough sex, which had frightened them. The defense countered that there was no direct evidence linking Chris to the crime and that the prosecution's case was based on speculation and conjecture. Chris had a clean record before the drug possession incident and was a successful IT professional with a stable job. The defense argued that Chris was incapable of murder. However, it was discovered that not all the CCTV footage had been saved, casting doubt on the prosecution's conclusion that Kelly had not left Chris's house. The defense presented a witness who claimed to have seen a girl resembling Kelly in another man's car the weekend after she went missing. Although the witness had previously seen Kelly on TV as a missing person, he was not 100% sure it was her. The defense offered an alternative explanation for Kelly's disappearance, suggesting that she may have left Chris's apartment safely but was later caught by one of her new boyfriends. The defense also questioned the reliability of the police dog during the investigation. Since the dog's reaction was not captured on video, its alert was based solely on the police officer's subjective interpretation. In response, the prosecution argued that the investigation using the sniffer dog was conducted objectively and transparently, with multiple police officers present and agreeing on the results. Ultimately, the prosecution convinced the jury that Chris was responsible for the murder. With no other obvious suspects, the prosecution argued that Chris had planned and executed the crime carefully, deliberately destroying evidence to cover his tracks. After lengthy deliberations, the jury found Chris guilty of first-degree manslaughter and concealing a body. The Kelly family and the prosecution had asked for the maximum sentence of 48 years, while the defense asked for a reduced sentence of 22 years. In December 2018, Chris Zacco, then 43, was sentenced to 31 years in prison, including 26 years for manslaughter and 5 years for concealing a body. In addition, Chris Zacco was sentenced to 19 years for possession of child pornography and possession of narcotics based on the outcome of his November 2014 trial. Chris Zacco is currently serving his sentence at the Green Bay Correctional Facility in Wisconsin. He will be eligible for parole in 2065, when he turns 93, essentially making his sentence a life sentence. Chris Zacco was unhappy with the sentence and attempted to appeal, but his appeal was rejected. Amanda Jane Dollar, or Millie Dollar as she was known by her family and friends, was born on June 25, 1988, to the happy couple of Bob and Sally Dollar. Millie also had an older sister named Gemma, whom she adored and looked up to. The girls got on extremely well and were practically best friends. Being the youngest in her family, Millie was brought up with extra love and care, which contributed to her becoming a kind and generous person. Gemma described her sister as friendly and vivacious, with a sparkle in her eye. During the early 2000s, Millie attended Heathside School in Weybridge, Surrey. Being the bubbly girl she was, she made a lot of friends, but one of them stood out in particular. Millie met Hannah MacDonald on a school trip to Germany in 2002, and both girls instantly became friends. In the following years at school, Millie and Hannah became inseparable. They would do everything together, whether it was homework, shopping, or simply lunch. Hannah and Millie became a part of each other's families. By this time, Millie had developed a keen interest in music. Millie loved spending time playing the saxophone, often with her close friends around. Millie was a bright light in the lives of those around her. She loved to cheer others up when they were having a bad day and did that effortlessly. On Thursday, March 21, 2002, Millie said goodbye to Hannah and left Heathside School in Weybridge, Surrey. At 3:07 p.m., she walked to Weybridge railway station with another friend that day. The two girls got off at the Walton-on-Thames railway station. This was one stop before Hersham, which was Millie's usual stop for her journey home. Millie and her friend had decided to grab a bite together at the station cafe before going home. They just wanted to enjoy a conversation over some good food. Once they were done, Millie called her father at 3:47 p.m. and informed him about the delay. Before hanging up, she promised him that she would be back home in the next 30 minutes. By 4:05, Millie and her friend parted ways and set off home. Unfortunately, only one of the girls made it home that evening. Millie's family awaited her arrival, but hours went by and there were no signs of her. As each minute passed, the Dollars grew more and more worried about their youngest. Tension had already started to set in, and soon Millie's family were sure that something awful had happened. At 7 p.m., Bob, Millie's father, called the authorities in Sussex and reported Millie as missing. Detective Chief Superintendent Craig Denholm from the Police Department of Sussex pulled together a team and led a massive search for Millie. The team included dozens of helicopters and more than 100 police officers searching the fields, streets, and rivers around Hersham. Even the detectives who had earlier worked on abduction cases were called in for help. A week after Millie's disappearance, the police had gathered a few facts related to Millie's disappearance. Millie was last seen around 4:10 p.m. by a friend of Gemma, Millie's sister, when she was waiting at the bus stop. Gemma's friend stated that she recognized Millie when she saw her walking along Station Avenue. Even though there was a CCTV camera located further along the road, it showed no images of Millie. This indicated that Millie had disappeared within minutes after crossing the bus stop. A car, specifically a red Daewoo Nexia, was photographed driving past the same camera at 4:32 p.m., just 20 minutes after Millie was last seen. Although there was no proof that this car had anything to do with Millie's disappearance, the detectives found it suspicious. Police and the Dollar family together made appeals to the media for information about their missing girl, Millie. Millie's parents were interviewed many times, where they urged people to be on the lookout for Millie and come forward if they had any information which could lead them to her. But sadly, these appeals and interviews were in vain. While nothing helpful came from those interviews, the police started to look at other possibilities. They stated that there was a high chance that Millie was probably not taken by force. They were so sure that Millie might have run away on her own will, not necessarily with someone. They backed this theory up by stating that even though a number of people had seen Millie before she went missing, nobody had seen her in a struggle with anyone. Sally Dollar, Millie's mother, only hoped that her daughter had run away, as it was much better than all the other grim possibilities that occupied her head. However, Sally could not think of a reason why Millie would want to run away. On April 23, 2002, the detectives were informed of the discovery of a body in River Thames, Walton. The news prompted the media to speculate that the remains might be those of Millie. However, the body was identified the following day as that of a 73-year-old woman named Maisie, who went missing in March 2001. An investigation was probed into Maisie's case as well, and her death was not believed to be suspicious. By the time it was June 2002, the police were working extensively searching for Millie. A national tabloid newspaper, The Sun, even offered a reward of £100,000 available for anyone who could lead the authorities to Millie, but sadly the reward was never claimed. Despite their tireless efforts, the detectives found no clues which could help them locate Millie. On June 25, 2002, it was Millie's 14th birthday, but she remained missing. By the end of that month, the police told Millie's parents that there was a high chance that Millie was dead. In the months that followed Millie's fading investigation, something strange happened. Millie's family and the detectives monitored Millie's phone, trying to locate it, but instead, they observed some suspicious activity in Millie's voicemail box. They noted that Millie's voicemails were being listened to and deleted. In a time when Millie's family was almost convinced that she was dead, the voicemail activity gave them a ray of hope that maybe Millie was still alive and hiding somewhere. For once, after months, the Dollar family could imagine being reunited with Millie. Bob and Sally, Millie's parents, started sending texts and voicemails to Millie's phone, thinking that someday she would reply, telling them about her current condition. However, all hopes the Dollars had gathered were brutally shattered on September 18, 2002. A few mushroom pickers passing through Yateley Heath Woods, near Yateley, Hampshire, discovered a cold and lifeless body. The body didn't have a single article of clothing on it, and it seemed like nobody had tried to bury the remains at all. Police closed the roads next to the site where the remains were found. Police officers suspected the remains to be those of Millie. They formed teams, and while some made sure the area was well guarded and secure, the others began a thorough search of the woods. Although a full forensic examination of the scene and the surrounding area was carried out to recover any evidence, no items that Millie had with her at the time of her disappearance, such as her clothing, purse, rucksack, or mobile phone, were ever recovered. However, on September 20, 2002, everyone's worst fears came true when the dental records examined by a forensic expert confirmed the remains to be those of the missing 13-year-old schoolgirl, Millie Dowler. But due to the severity of the decomposition, Millie's cause of death could not be determined, but police were sure it was murder. Sometime after verifying the medical examiner's report, the police officers informed Millie's family of the horrific discovery. Bob, Sally, and Gemma's hearts were shattered to the core. The news broke out and the media covered the full story, spreading it across the whole nation. Thousands of people mourned that day, expressing their sorrow over losing Millie. A couple of weeks later, in October 2002, Millie's family organized a memorial service for her. Dozens gathered on the lawn in front of Millie's school, dropping flowers and paying tributes to Millie. Millie was then laid to rest in Woking Crematorium in Woking Borough, Surrey, on March 21, 2003, exactly a year from the day she disappeared. The discovery of Millie's body led the police to reclassify the case as a homicide investigation, undertaken again by Surrey police. The investigation was codenamed Operation Ruby. On November 22, 2002, the detective set up a roadblock near the spot where Millie's body was discovered. The Surrey Police Department didn't want to leave any stones unturned and hence re-examined the crime scene and the surrounding area to make sure they didn't miss anything out. They questioned around 6,000 motorists in the area, but no new clues or leads were discovered. Knowing that in cases such as Millie's, a family member could most likely be the perpetrator, they even considered Bob Dollar, Millie's father, a suspect. However, this line of investigation was quickly dropped, as there was no evidence linking Bob to Millie's murder. The detectives apologized for the missed opportunities their attention to this track may have caused. On March 23, 2003, detectives discovered the DNA of an unidentified male on one of Millie's clothes found in her bedroom. This gave detectives the impression that Millie's killer might have met her before. But within 3 months, this link was ruled out by the detectives. They never shared the reason behind this decision. Even after the discovery of Millie's body, the Dollar family's suffering didn't end. The investigation into Millie's case was turning out to be a frustrating one for the detectives, but mostly for Millie's family. Beginning in 2003 itself, Millie's family and the detectives started receiving misleading and false information. This insensitive and foolish behavior not only hurt the Dollar family's sentiments, but also made the investigators go around in circles and lose valuable time. Gemma, Millie's older sister, started receiving some mischievous letters. In these letters, an unidentified person with a mischievous tone claimed to have killed Millie. He even went on to give death threats to Gemma, warning that she too would meet the same fate as her sister. Even though Gemma was in a fragile state of mind, she didn't hesitate to report these letters to the authorities. The detectives were quick to follow up and nab the author of those nasty letters. He was identified as a man named Paul Hughes. It was confirmed that he had no relation to either Gemma or Millie. Paul had sent those letters to Gemma while he was already imprisoned for indecently assaulting a 12-year-old girl. The prison service later apologized for not screening the mail effectively. Paul was convicted for his crimes against Gemma and was given an additional sentence of 5 years behind bars. Around the same time that year, a woman named Leanne Newman of Tewkesbury, Gloucestershire repeatedly phoned Millie's parents, school, and the police. Over the phone calls, Leanne pretended to be Millie. In April 2003, she was jailed for 5 months after pleading guilty to 5 counts of making phone calls to cause annoyance, inconvenience, or needless anxiety. Every time Bob, Sally, and Gemma Dowler tried to put behind them Millie's tragic death and move on with their lives, some maniac would show up and shatter their healing process. For the Dowlers, it was like someone was rubbing salt in their wounds. On July 6, 2005, a man named Levi Belfield caught the attention of the detective's eyes. Levi was a tall, hefty man in his early 30s back in 2005, who was born and raised in southwest London. Levi Belfield was also a serial killer who had been convicted for the murders of 19-year-old Marcia MacDonald in February 2003 and 22-year-old Emile Delagrange in August 2004, and the attempted murder of 18-year-old Kate Sheedy sometime in 2004. For these crimes, which clearly took place after Millie's murder, Levi was already serving a whole life tariff, a custodial sentence handed out for the most heinous crimes, which meant that he would spend his entire life in jail. The detectives took a closer look at Levi's crimes and noted that some of them had taken place around the area that Millie was abducted from. They suspected Levi to be involved in Millie's murder as well and decided to question him. After a few minutes into the questioning, Levi was beginning to get uncomfortable with the line of questioning, which was evident from his body language and short responses. The fact that Levi never denied killing Millie suggested that he was somehow connected to her murder. But this wasn't enough. They needed something solid, and for that, they reached out to Levi's past lovers. Joanna, an ex-partner of Levi, shared her disturbing experience with him and told how dangerous he was as a person. One of Levi's known surviving victims, Kate Sheedy, shared her nightmarish story as well. She stated that she was unaware that Levi had been following her in his white van while she was on the bus, and as soon as she got off the bus and walked into an isolated area, Levi rammed his van into her. After some turbulence and a few setbacks, there was finally some valuable progress being made in the investigation into Millie's murder. However, things turned shaky once again in 2006 when a man named Gary Farr of Redford, Nottinghamshire, started sending emails to Millie's parents and friends repeatedly. In those emails, Gary claimed that Millie was still alive. He said that she had been smuggled out of the country to work as an entertainer at nightclubs in Poland. He even claimed that Millie's death was merely a facade to cover up what actually had happened. As a result of these misleading emails, Gary was sectioned indefinitely under the Mental Health Act on October 19, 2006, for being a serious psychological danger to the public after admitting a charge of harassment. A confirmatory investigation was launched in the following years, and on March 30, 2010, Levi was charged with Millie's abduction and murder, and as a result, an 8-year-long search for Millie's murderer was finally over. On October 6, 2010, Levi appeared virtually in court via video and was formally charged with 1 count of attempted abduction, 1 count of abduction, 1 count of disposal of evidence, and 1 count of murder. Before the trial began, Justice Secretary Kenneth Clark rejected calls for a review of Levi's past criminal cases. Justice Kenneth said that, while Levi had been convicted of previous murders, he had to be presumed innocent in Millie's case and be found guilty by a jury in a full court process. He believed that bringing up Levi's charges for the murders of Marcia MacDonald and Emile de la Grange and the attempted murder of Kate Sheedy would prejudice the trial. To keep that from happening, the court did not allow evidence to be introduced of Levi's obsession with schoolgirls and his attempt to abduct and assault them. Levi's trial began on May 10, 2011, and concluded 6 weeks later on June 23, 2011, with the jury finding him guilty. Levi was handed another life sentence on Friday, June 24, 2011, for abducting and murdering Millie Dowler. During the course of Levi's trial in Millie's case, another old case was brought to light. Levi was being suspected of an attempted abduction of an 11-year-old girl named Rachel Callis. The incident allegedly took place in 2002, on March 20th, when Rachel was offered a lift by a man in a red car in the Walton area. However, the request for Levi's trial on this case was dismissed due to newspapers publishing articles with preconceived notions. But the judge ordered that the charge should remain on file so it could be properly investigated later. After Levi's sentencing, the Dollar family strongly criticized the treatment they faced during the trial. Millie's sister Gemma described the day that her parents were cross-examined by Levi's defense lawyer as the worst day of her life. Sally, Millie's mother, told reporters that the trial had been a truly awful experience for her and her family. She said that they had to hear Millie's name being defamed in court as Levi's defense lawyers tried to portray Millie as an unhappy, depressed young girl. Sally reassured that Millie was none of those things at all. She was a happy, vivacious, fun-loving girl. Sally was upset that her family's life had been scrutinized and laid open for everyone to inspect. The Dollars were stripped of their right to privacy and made to sit through the painful trial, day after day, in order to get an evil man convicted of their beloved Millie's brutal murder. Bob, Millie's father, criticized how Levi refused to appear physically in court and to give evidence for his sentencing. He was disgusted by the fact that he was questioned about his relationship with his own daughter. Bob added that his family had to pay too high a price for Levi's conviction. Bob was hurt that the trial had been a truly mentally scarring experience for him and his family. Bob also revealed that when he and his family were being questioned, it made them feel as if they were the ones on trial, not Levi. Bob further shamed the judicial system for being so loaded in favor of the perpetrator of the crime. When the news that the Dollars were mistreated and harshly cross-examined in the courtroom broke, it led to a debate over how victims and witnesses were treated in court. On July 4, 2011, it was discovered that Millie's voicemails had been accessed and altered by journalists working for a newspaper that went by the name of News of the World. The newspaper's private investigator, Glenn Mulcair, was particularly criticized. It was revealed that during the police investigation into the newspaper's phone hacking activities, detectives discovered that journalists had deleted some messages in Millie's voicemail box, which could have been potential evidence in Millie's case. They did so because the mailbox was full, and they wanted to free up space for new messages so they could listen to them. This was the reason why, back in 2002, after noticing activity in Millie's voicemail box, The Dollar family thought that Millie was still alive even after her disappearance, which, as it turned out, was not the case at all. The phone hacking scandal earned the anger of the Prime Minister, David Cameron, who called it a truly dreadful act. In response to the British public's outcry, several inquiries were conducted into phone hacking and media ethics. The newspaper itself was closed in 2011 as a direct result of the outrage. The Prime Minister David Cameron sat down with Millie's family to have a discussion over the press hacking incident. Bob and Sally, Millie's parents, announced they would pursue a claim for damages against the News of the World. In September 2011, it was reported that the Dollar family had been offered £2 million in personal damages. On January 12th, it was reported that Surrey police and other police forces were made aware soon after Millie's death that News of the World staff had accessed her voicemail box, but the detectives did not publicly address this information. Instead, a senior Surrey officer invited the newspaper staff to a meeting to discuss the case and settle things in secret. Millie's family felt even more cheated after learning about this situation. A red Daewoo Nexia, which was photographed driving past the same camera that captured Millie shortly after she was abducted, belonged to Levi's then-girlfriend Emma Mills. Levi said that he was driving the car at that time. On January 27, 2016, Surrey police announced that Levi had admitted to the abduction, assault, and murder of Millie Dowler. However, on February 12, 2016, Levi changed his story and denied that he had ever confessed to assaulting and murdering Millie. Millie's death had a great impact on her parents, Bob and Sally. Even though their beloved daughter was now gone, they wanted to make sure that nothing similar would happen to any other child. Sally and Bob launched a charity called Millie's Fund on the day of her memorial service. The charity provided risk assessment advice to teenagers, youth workers, and educators, and aimed at promoting public safety of children and young people. About a couple of years after Millie's body was discovered, Heathside School, where Millie was a student, gathered a team together and built a memorial garden for Millie and named it Amanda Dollar Memorial Garden. It followed a paved pattern around borders, planted with flowers and shrubs, and had benches for people to stop by and remember Millie. Sally and Bob Dollar, together with her sister Gemma, were present at the moving ceremony when the garden was first opened to the public. The school staff and some governors also attended. The Reverend Nick Whitehead concluded the official opening with a prayer and a blessing. The principal thanked all the individuals, businesses, and organizations that offered a helping hand in converting the dream of making a memorial garden for Millie into a reality. School principal Glenn Willoughby said that he believed that a lot of people in Walton needed a place of peace and tranquility. At the school, the students and staff can visit to remember Millie and to have some space and time to reflect on anything that may be on their mind. On June 29, 2017, Gemma, Millie's sister, released a book dedicated to Millie entitled My Sister Millie. Gemma wrote the book in loving memory of her little sister and to express how much she missed her. In the book, Gemma talked about how Millie's chance at having a beautiful childhood and life was snatched away from her and how it impacted the Dollar family. Gemma also shed light on her family's journey of going from extreme pain to healing and achieving closure. It came as cold comfort to the Dowlers and the family of Levi's other victims that he will never be free again. Levi became the only person ever to have been handed 2 separate whole life tariffs in British history. Levi is behind bars at HM Prison, Frankland, in County Durham. The prison is commonly referred to as the Monster Mansion due to many of its inmates being convicted murderers and high risk in general. Levi has now converted to Islam and now goes by the name Yusuf Rahim, but no matter what he does, he will never set foot out in the free world. Even after more than 20 years of Millie's disappearance, Hannah MacDonald, Millie's best friend from school, is still close to Millie's family. For years, Hannah bottled up her grief thinking about how her best friend was robbed of a wonderful life. Hannah still misses Millie, who will always hold a special place in her heart. Do you think there are any more unsolved murders that Belfield might have committed? How do you think the detectives handled Millie's case? Could they have been more efficient? Let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. Alexandra Ali Elizabeth Kemp was born October 11, 1982 in Leawood. She was the oldest of 3 children and the only daughter of her parents. After graduating high school with honors, Alexandra enrolled at Kansas State University. Following her freshman year, she returned to her hometown of Leawood for summer break. During her break, Alexandra took a part-time job at a local outdoor swimming pool near her parents' house, where her younger brother Tyler already worked. The pool was a quiet neighborhood spot, catering mainly to local residents, and it still operates today. On June 18, 2002, Alexandra reported to work on an overcast day because resulted in fewer visitors than usual. At 5 p.m., Tyler arrived at the pool to start his shift, but his sister Alexandra was nowhere to be found. Her phone and purse were still on the table where she usually sat, which made Tyler confused and worried. He immediately called his parents to report that Alexandra had vanished. Their father, Roger Kemp, rushed to the scene and began searching for his daughter. He first checked the pool, but it was empty. Next, he went to the small pump room near the pool which contained equipment for water purification, a ladder, and other items. Upon entering the pump room, Roger didn't see anything out of the ordinary at first. However, he soon noticed a leg protruding from under a tarp. As he lifted the tarp, he was met with a horrific sight. His daughter Alexandra, brutally beaten and naked from the waist down, with multiple bruises on her face and body. Roger quickly called 911 and spoke with the operator. When the ambulance arrived, Roger was performing CPR on his daughter. The paramedics took Alexandra to the hospital, but despite their best efforts, she sadly did not survive. Alexandra was declared dead shortly after arrival at the hospital. An examination revealed that the cause of death was strangulation despite the presence of multiple severe injuries. A thorough investigation found no evidence of forced intimacy, although her body was partially unclothed. The police collected DNA samples from Alexandra's body and secured the pool area, searching for clues to identify the perpetrator. Evidence of a struggle was evident in the room where Roger discovered Alexandra's body, including her flip-flops found in separate locations. Additionally, an open bottle of antiseptic gel and its cap were found at the scene. A few days later, while the police continued to investigate, Alexandra's family and hundreds of mourners gathered to pay their respects at a funeral ceremony. Phil Howes, Alexandra's boyfriend since high school, was initially suspected in her death. As a pool administrator, he worked the morning shift on the day of her death, and Alexandra arrived at noon to start her 5-hour shift. Although Phil often stayed after work to spend time with Alexandra, he left promptly after his shift that day because they had plans for the evening. Despite being an early suspect, Phil had a solid alibi and was quickly cleared by the police. In an interview with detectives, Phil mentioned that Alexandra often felt uncomfortable being alone at work because some of the lawn maintenance workers would stare at her and try to flirt. The police investigated the lawn workers, but each of them had an alibi. However, the inquiry wasn't entirely fruitless. Several workers reported seeing a suspicious man with a video camera lurking in the bushes near the pool the day before Alexandra's death, apparently watching the female lifeguards in swimsuits. The police were given conflicting reports about Alexandra's final hours. Some people said she left the scene in an old Ford pickup truck, while others mentioned different circumstances. A study of Alexandra's mobile phone activity revealed that she had made plans with a friend, Laurel, to meet on the day she died. However, Alexandra didn't show up. When Laurel went to the police station to give her account of events, she explained that Alexandra had asked her to come to the pool to keep her company until her shift ended. According to Laurel, the pool was empty that day due to the poor weather, which made Alexandra anxious. When Laurel arrived at the pool at around 2:30 p.m., she didn't see Alexandra anywhere. Instead, a man she didn't know emerged from the pool house and waved at her with a smile. Laurel thought this man might be Alexandra's boss, and she decided to leave so as not to get her friend in trouble for socializing during work hours. At the time, she had no reason to think that anything was amiss. The police investigation led them away from Alexandra's workplace and to a completely different suspect. As a witness, Laurel provided a detailed description of the person she believed committed the crime. The police used this description to create a sketch of the suspect, who was identified as a white man around 30 years old with a stocky build, short brown hair, and driving a 1980 Ford pickup truck. The suspect's identity was narrowed down when someone recognized the description as matching James Strader, a local mechanic who owned an old Ford pickup truck. James was questioned by the police and appeared to match the sketch, but he denied any involvement in Alexandra's death. His employer verified his alibi, stating that James was at work on the day of the murder. As a result, James was released from custody. While the police had eliminated James as a suspect, forensic analysis of evidence collected from the crime scene revealed male DNA on an antiseptic gel tube and on Alexandra's body. Unfortunately, the DNA did not match anyone in the police database, leaving the case still unsolved. Alexandra's family, friends, and boyfriend were ruled out as suspects after DNA tests showed no match with the DNA samples found on her body. The investigation was driven by Alexandra's father, Roger Kemp, who was determined to find his daughter's killer. After losing his child, Roger felt like he had lost his purpose in life. However, he found a new reason to keep going: justice for Alexandra. In an interview, Roger explained his approach: "You can either give up or keep fighting. I chose to fight." Impressed by his dedication, the police department gave Roger a workspace where he could collect and share information and collaborate with the investigators. As they explored all available leads, Roger and the investigators contacted the popular TV show, America's Most Wanted, and asked them to feature Alexandra's case. The show's producers agreed, and her story was aired. The episode generated hundreds of calls from viewers with potential tips. Although the authorities thoroughly investigated each lead, none of them led to a breakthrough, and the case stalled once again. In February 2003, 8 months after Alexandra's death, a promising new lead emerged. Following a thorough investigation, police in Utah apprehended a suspect. 3 separate witnesses, including 2 women and a 14-year-old girl, came forward to report being forced into intimate encounters with a man. He had managed to evade capture initially, but was eventually tracked down and arrested in Utah. The arrested individual was identified as James Strader, the same person who had been questioned by Kansas police earlier. Notably, James bore a strong physical resemblance to the suspect's composite sketch. James was questioned by the police, but they failed to collect his DNA sample at the time. This might have been because his employer had convinced the police that James was at work on the day of the crime and had not left the premises. Despite this, James denied any involvement in Alexandra Kemp's death. Although he resembled the suspect in the composite sketch, James claimed he had not been near the pool on the day of the crime. He eventually provided a DNA sample for analysis. The results indicates that his DNA did not match the DNA found on Alexandra's body or the antiseptic gel tube. James was later imprisoned for unrelated charges, and the investigation into Alexandra Kemp's death hit a dead end once again. A year after Alexandra's death, the police still had no leads. Roger Kemp, Alexandra's father, and Phil House, her boyfriend, continued to fight for justice. Phil, who was also the president of the student community, sent the composite sketch of the suspect to students at other universities via email and asked them to watch an episode of America's Most Wanted that featured Alexandra Kemp's case. A year had passed, but the police and relatives' efforts had yielded no results in the Alexandra Kemp case. Undeterred, Roger Kemp, Alexandra's father, continued his quest for justice. He reached out to the America's Most Wanted program again, requesting a rerun of the episode about Alexandra's death. The show's creators asked if there were any new developments, and although Roger replied that there were none, his determination impressed them, leading to the episode being aired again. The rerun generated a fresh wave of calls to the police, prompting Roger to offer a $25,000 reward for any information that could help identify the person responsible for his daughter's death. The city of Leawood authorities increased the reward to $50,000. Roger also distributed flyers featuring his daughter's photo, a sketch of the suspect, and details about the reward. As Roger drove along the highway, he noticed billboards and realized they could be an effective way to raise awareness about the case. He began contacting advertising agencies to inquire about the cost of posting the information on a billboard. When he called the Lamar Advertising Company, the owner refused to take his money, offering to display the information on multiple billboards for free instead. Raja decided to publicize a sketch of the suspect and reward information on billboards along a major highway. The police received hundreds of tips, which took time to investigate. Notably, multiple tips mentioned the same individual, Teddy Hoover, who owned an old Ford pickup truck and worked in pool maintenance. His appearance matched the suspects, making it unlikely to be a coincidence. The police launched a search for Teddy Hoover and found his address in Kansas. When they arrived, Teddy answered the door, appearing surprised and nervous. However, this reaction didn't necessarily imply guilt, as many people become nervous when confronted by the police. When questioned about his whereabouts on June 18, 2002, Teddy claimed he couldn't remember, which was understandable given the year time lapse. Teddy denied any involvement in maintaining the pool where Alexandra worked. Nevertheless, the detectives asked him to provide a voluntary DNA sample to rule him out as a suspect. Teddy declined, stating he needed to consult with a lawyer first. He promised to contact the police after speaking with his attorney. The next day, Teddy's lawyer reached out to the investigators, expressing his client's concerns about his DNA sample being added to a database. Teddy reportedly believed in various conspiracy theories and feared that if he cooperated with the police, they would use the information against him in other cases. In an effort to alleviate his concerns, the investigators promised not to enter his DNA into any database and only use it to compare with the DNA found on Alexandra Kemp. The lawyer agreed to speak with his client and said he would call back. As they waited for the call, the police reviewed the case materials again and stumbled upon a piece of paper in one of the folders with a name that caught their attention. On the day of Alexandra's death, detectives began questioning onlookers who had gathered by the pool, trying to determine if anyone had seen anything suspicious. Interestingly, one of the people they spoke with was Teddy Hoover, who had claimed he had never been to the crime scene before. As the investigation continued, detectives grew increasingly confident that Teddy Hoover might be the man they had been searching for over the past 2 years. After several days, investigators contacted Teddy's lawyer to ask if his client was willing to provide a DNA sample. However, the lawyer responded by stating that his client had refused his services and broken off contact. Police immediately went to Teddy's house, but he had already escaped. As a result, the 29-year-old suspect was placed on the National Wanted list. Despite the efforts of the detectives, Teddy managed to evade capture for months. Billboards featuring his image were still up, but the search had yielded nothing. It wasn't until September 2004 when an anonymous caller contacted the police that a new lead emerged. According to the caller, he knew the name of Teddy's girlfriend with whom Teddy was living in Kansas. Detectives sought to locate Laura Barr, a woman connected to Teddy Hoover, but discovered she had left the state at the same time he escaped. This led them to investigate further. The U.S. Postal Service informed the Kansas State Police that Laura was receiving mail in Litchfield, Connecticut, along with a man named Benjamin Appleby, at the same address. The house where they resided was secluded and located in a rural area. Authorities suspected that Benjamin Appleby might be an alias for Teddy Hoover. To aid in the investigation, detectives from Leawood contacted the Connecticut State Police requesting their assistance in locating Benjamin. It was discovered that he had a prior record in Connecticut with an outstanding arrest warrant stemming from a 1997 incident where he had exposed himself to a schoolgirl. However, Benjamin had evaded capture and fled the state. With the existing warrant, detectives proceeded to the address associated with Benjamin's mail. Upon arrival, they found him at home and immediately took him into custody. As suspected, Benjamin Appleby was confirmed to be Teddy Hoover. It was revealed that while detectives in Kansas had been seeking a DNA sample from Teddy in connection with Alexandra Kemp's death, he had returned to Connecticut and resumed using his real name, attempting to maintain a low profile and escape notice. To apprehend Benjamin, detectives from Leawood traveled to Connecticut, anticipating that he would once again claim innocence. Before bringing him in for questioning, they devised a plan to unsettle him. They filled the interrogation room with crime scene photos and pictures of Alexander and placed folders with his name on the table, creating the illusion that the investigation had substantial evidence against him. When Benjamin entered the interrogation room, he was visibly shaken and unable to speak. A detective confronted him, inquiring about the implications of obtaining his DNA sample. Shortly after, Benjamin broke down in tears, confessing to Alexandra's death. He then recounted the events of the fateful June day, explaining that he had noticed Alexandra, found her attractive, and attempted to flirt with her. When she entered the pump room, he followed her, locked the door, and trapped her inside. When Benjamin touched she fought back, leaving him feeling humiliated. In a fit of anger, he attacked her, beating and strangling her until she lost consciousness. Benjamin then attempted to take advantage of her body, undressing her partially. He retrieved a tube of antiseptic gel from a first aid kit, intending to use it as a lubricant. However, just as he was about to proceed, the sound of a car horn distracted him. The victim's friend, who was waiting in a car behind a fence, had noticed something was amiss and sounded the horn. Fearing he would be caught, Benjamin hastily covered the body and fled the scene. Later, Benjamin returned to the area, where he encountered Alexandra's friend, whom he greeted with a smile and a wave, trying to appear nonchalant. He then got into his pickup truck and drove away. Hours later, Benjamin returned to the crime scene again, this time blending in with the crowd of onlookers gathered near the pool. The DNA evidence ultimately led to Benjamin's downfall. Tests revealed that the DNA found on the tube of antiseptic gel and on Alexandra's body matched Benjamin's. Thanks in large part to the efforts of investigator Roger Kemp, the police were finally able to identify the man responsible for Alexandra's murder more than 2 years after the crime was committed. Benjamin Appleby claimed he initially wanted to plead guilty to avoid putting Alexandra's family through further emotional distress. However, at his first court hearing, he suddenly declared his innocence, stating that his confession was made under duress. Despite this, DNA analysis revealed that his DNA was the only sample found on the victim's body, making it difficult to dispute his involvement. Benjamin's lawyers attempted to argue that their client did not intentionally take Alexandra's life, admitting that he was responsible for her death, but claiming it was not premeditated. However, forensic experts pointed out that Benjamin had strangled Alexandra for approximately 10 minutes, during which time he could have stopped but chose not to. The prosecution argued that Benjamin's sole intention was to observe Alexandra. On the day of the incident, June 18th, the pool area was empty due to cloudy weather, allowing Benjamin to take advantage of the situation. He was found guilty by a jury in December 2005 and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 50 years, as well as an additional 19 years for attempting to force Alexandra into intimacy. In 2019, Benjamin appealed the decision, but the court upheld the life imprisonment sentence for first-degree murder. The Court of Appeal also ruled that the attempt to force Alexandra into intimacy was already taken into account during the initial sentencing. Benjamin was sentenced twice for the same crime, prompting the court to overturn the second conviction. However, even if Benjamin is released on parole, he will be 81 years old by that time. The authorities involved in the case credit Roger Kemp's persistence for helping them catch the culprit. While Benjamin was in prison, Roger and his wife established a self-defense program for girls, teaching thousands of girls and women across the country basic self-defense techniques. Roger Kemp's tireless efforts to bring attention to the case and his work in creating a safe community did not go unnoticed. He was awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal by Barack Obama at the White House. Until his passing at 77 on March 1, 2022, Roger continued to work for the foundation he established in his daughter's name. His ultimate goal was to make a difference in at least one person's life. The case of Lucy. Lucy Davies was born in 1971 in Rhondda, a county in England. She was the daughter of Roger and Andrea Davies and had a younger sister named Anna. The family lived in a small, tight-knit community of socially purposed housing, surrounded by stunning mountain scenery. Lucy had a happy and carefree childhood, bonding closely with her sister, who shared similar interests. Her parents often mentioned Lucy's infectious joy, which made her a standout student in primary school. Known for her outgoing and likable personality, Lucy quickly won over her teachers and classmates. With her undeniable beauty, she became one of the most popular and admired girls in school. Lucy and her sister Anna shared a passion for ponies, which led their father to enroll them in the local riding club. This experience taught them discipline and showcased their talent, eventually earning them the right to participate in various events and competitions. By the time Lucy started secondary school, she had developed into an exceptional rider. In addition to her riding skills, Lucy was also a talented musician. She took flute and piano lessons, dedicating long hours to practice and master both instruments. Her hard work paid off, and soon she had a comprehensive understanding of classical music. This led to her acceptance into a youth orchestra and her school's choir group. During this time, Lucy developed a romantic interest in Gareth Jenkins, but she kept it a secret. After completing secondary school in 1989, Lucy decided to pursue a music-related career. She enrolled in the University of Warwick to study for a bachelor's degree, hoping to become a music teacher. However, she soon realized that the degree program wasn't what she had expected. Her passion for music remained, but she didn't enjoy the direction of the program. As a result, Lucy changed her plan and opted to study urban planning instead. Around this time, Lucy met Graham Callister, and they soon discovered that they shared a similar outlook on life, including a passion for art and common interests. A key aspect of their bond was their matching sense of humor. Their relationship developed naturally, and as they made plans for the future, Lucy decided to introduce GRA to her parents, Roger and Andrea. The meeting went well, and Lucy's parents were convinced that GRA was the right person for their daughter. In fact, they were so confident in their relationship that they bought Lucy a house in Coventry, northwest of London. This gift not only provided Lucy with a stable home, free from the uncertainties of renting and moving, but also reflected their wish for her to start a family. Shortly after moving in, Lucy invited GRA to live with her, and they continued their studies together. In 1995, they welcomed their first child, James. Lucy decided to take a break from university to care for him, while GRA continued his studies and worked the night shift at the city's postal sorting office. Over time, this arrangement took a toll on Lucy, who felt bored and isolated at home, caring for their child and often separated from her partner for long periods. To alleviate her boredom, Lucy turned to internet chat rooms, seeking to meet new people and find some distraction. One night, Lucy engaged in lively conversations in various online chat rooms where she encountered Harold Landry, a 53-year-old American from Louisiana. Growing up in a financially struggling family with a dozen siblings, Harold knew from an early age that he had to rely on his own efforts and determination to succeed. To escape poverty, he dedicated himself to hard work from a young age. His big break came when he realized that the key to success in the oil business wasn't owning wells, but providing essential infrastructure to well owners. Consequently, he founded a company specializing in designing and manufacturing hydraulic equipment for major oil companies in the southern United States. As he had predicted, the business made him incredibly wealthy, eventually earning him billionaire status. By then, Harold split his time between his central hobbies and a property on KML Island in Mexico. He had been married and divorced twice with children from these unions, whose exact number and identities remained private. One thing was certain, however: Harold ensured that his children lacked nothing. A significant event took place in 1992, when Harold, now single, met a woman 20 years younger who was married. Despite her marital status, Harold used his charms to win her over, undeterred by her family's or husband's potential opposition. On February 6, 1994, Harold took her on an outing in New Orleans, hiring a babysitter to watch her children. After their evening together, Harold dropped his lover off at home and offered to drive the babysitter back to her own place. Surprisingly, no one seemed worried that her husband would discover the infidelity and react angrily. However, that's precisely what happened. Outside his wife's residence, Chris Price had been keeping a close eye on her every move. When the third party said goodbye to her, Chris followed him in his car. A short while later, Harold noticed he was being tailed. Acting on instinct, Harold opened the glove compartment, pulled out a firearm he normally kept there, and prepared for a confrontation. When they both stopped at a red light, the situation escalated. According to the babysitter's account, Harold brandished the revolver at Chris and fired. The bullet severely injured Chris, severing an artery in his neck and damaging a nerve connected to his vocal cord. Chris collapsed on the pavement, but luckily there was a hospital nearby, allowing him to receive prompt medical attention. The doctors were able to save his life. Harold was arrested and charged with attempted murder. His trial took place in 1997. The defense attorney argued in the opening statement that Harold's actions were the result of a tragic and sordid affair involving Chris, and that he had acted out of fear and in self-defense. This strategy led the jury, composed of 4 men and 8 women, to convict Harold of the lesser offense of aggravated assault. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, after an appeal, Harold was granted probation in exchange for a $500 fine and community service. Although he had hoped to be fully exonerated, he thanked his lawyer, Pat, for his efforts. The 2 men subsequently became close friends. After reaching a confidential agreement with Chris, Harold moved to Covington, where he lived a life of luxury, free from financial worries. When he started chatting with Lucy, he was open about his past, sharing stories about his jobs, romantic escapades, and legal issues. However, instead of deterring Lucy, this honesty only strengthened her attraction to him. The 2 began a captivating online romance, with Harold promising her a highly desirable lifestyle. Eventually, his persistence and persuasive abilities convinced Lucy to end her relationship with GRA, clearing the way for Harold to pursue her, without any rival claiming his attention. In the early 2000s, Harold traveled to England to meet Lucy, and she took the opportunity to introduce him to her parents, Roger and Andrea, as her boyfriend. Although they were surprised by the significant age difference, they respected their daughter's decisions and did not object to the relationship. Harold felt fulfilled and fortunate to share his life with Lucy, and he spared no effort to surprise her, whether with luxurious gifts or anything else she desired. In fact, by then, he was so in love that he was already planning to propose marriage. However, he wanted to do it in an ideal setting. To achieve this goal, Harold took Lucy, her son James, and GRA on a trip to Mexico, a place that had become his favorite destination in the world. His longtime friend Pat, who had been his attorney in the past trial, also had an apartment close to his residence, which added to the feeling of comfort. Initially, Harold bought a diamond ring and shared the news with enthusiasm with Pat. However, Pat harbored certain suspicions about Lucy, and as the days passed, he found it strange that she had dedicated a good part of her time in Graz's company. Despite this, Harold was oblivious to it and ultimately proceeded with his plan to propose. Lucy happily accepted the proposal, and in mid-2003, the couple celebrated their union. Shortly after, Harold surprised Lucy by buying $1 million property in an exclusive Worcester neighborhood. In this peaceful rural setting, their marriage got off to a prosperous start, helped by their excellent neighbors, Rachel Clark and Stephen Kennedy, with whom they formed a close friendship. Soon, Lucy gave birth to their first daughter, Harriet, which filled both her and Harold with joy. From then on, he devoted himself to the little girl with unwavering energy and commitment. He also maintained a loving relationship with James, treating him like his own son. As time passed, Lucy's workload increased and her mood began to deteriorate in proportion to Harold's demands. He expected her to constantly adapt to his preferences and obey his requests without question. Lucy, however, had different expectations. This led to rising tensions between them. Lucy was outspoken and unafraid to express her opinions, but Harold was unwilling to compromise. Given their volatile personalities, their arguments frequently escalated into intense fights, followed by reconciliations once the conflict had subsided. The constant disputes that lasted for hours became a familiar background noise in the lives of Rachel and Stephen. They knew that Lucy and Harold's alcoholism fueled their arguments and complaints, which often led to days of not speaking to each other. Lucy reconnected with Gareth, an old friend from secondary school, and they spent hours catching up, occasionally interrupted by their own commitments. One evening, after Harold fell asleep, Lucy stayed on her computer, and it dawned on him that she was unhappy and looking for a distraction, possibly even a replacement, just like she had found him. In the autumn of 2009, Lucy invited Gareth to stay with her. Meanwhile, Harold returned to England, hoping to salvage their marriage. But as soon as he arrived home, Lucy asked him for a divorce. Initially, Harold was devastated. But after a few weeks, he started a new relationship with a woman he met online. Alongside their budding new relationships, divorce negotiations were progressing. And as is often the case, new disputes arose, particularly regarding the family home. Lucy's expectation was to retain the house, thereby guaranteeing a stable living arrangement for their children. However, Harold was adamant that this was not up for discussion. His proposed solution involved offering her financial compensation to purchase a more modest apartment independently. Simultaneously, he made the decision to entirely remove her from his will. Lucy was furious when she learned about her still husband's latest decisions. Her intense hatred towards him led her to share every detail about Harold's past with her son James, holding nothing back. Amidst the tension and complicated situation, Gareth invited her to take a break and spend a few days with him in Wales. Both Lucy and Harold had a serious drinking problem, and their arguments were becoming increasingly violent, leaving their children to suffer in a toxic environment. On the afternoon of February 1st, 2010, Harold had several glasses of wine. When Stephen returned from work, he found a notification that his package had been delivered to the wrong address, the Landrys. Harold invited Stephen in and offered him a glass of wine. This led to a ridiculous argument with Lucy over a piece of furniture she wanted to buy for their upcoming move. The argument quickly turned physical, and in the chaos, Harold grabbed a kitchen utensil and hit Lucy on the cheek. James rushed to the scene of the altercation and found his mother, Lucy, badly injured. He immediately called the police and then turned his attention to ensuring his younger sister's safety. Shortly after, Lucy, realizing she needed help, left the house with her children. Her first thought was to seek refuge at Stephen's house, which was nearby. As she headed in that direction, Harold caught up with her and attacked her with a knife, inflicting multiple injuries. He then left her lying under a bush in the garden, abandoning her. Stephen, alerted by Lucy's screams, rushed outside and found her just a few steps away. Initially, he thought she was unconscious, but quickly realized the gravity of the situation. The police responded promptly to the emergency call and arrived on the scene. They called for paramedics and searched the surrounding area for Harold, but only found the terrified children hiding in the backyard. The paramedics worked quickly to treat Lucy and rushed her to the hospital, where her heart unfortunately stopped beating shortly after arrival. Harold visited Rachel's house and confessed to her that a terrible event had occurred, but he didn't provide any additional information. He handed her 3 bank drafts worth a total of $40,000, some cash, the keys to his car, and several signed blank checks. After that, he headed back home. By then, multiple police patrols were searching for him. They eventually found him walking along the road and arrested him. Roger and Andrea were consumed by grief when they heard the devastating news. In a statement released by the police, they requested that people respect their privacy during this incredibly difficult time following the loss of their daughter. From that point on, their focus shifted to taking care of their grandchildren. The forensic examination revealed that Lucy's death was caused by multiple stab wounds to the chest. With this evidence, combined with James' eyewitness testimony, Harold was charged with murder on February 5, 2010, when he appeared in court. The trial took place in early February 2011, presided over by Judge David Fawson. Unlike previous instances, did not serve as Harold's defender. Instead, attorney Andy Childs took on the role. Despite the challenging task ahead, Childs argued that Harold had been provoked by his wife's intense anger, leaving him no choice but to react as he did. During his emotional testimony, Harold expressed his love for Lucy and regretted his actions. Following the strategy outlined by his lawyer, Harold admitted to involuntary manslaughter, claiming that Lucy had driven him to his limits. To emphasize the brutality of the case, the prosecution presented a detailed animation in court, recreating the multiple injuries the victim suffered. This graphic presentation shocked those present in the courtroom. Ultimately, on February 24, 2011, the jury delivered a verdict after less than 4 hours of deliberation. They found Harold Landry guilty of murdering his 38-year-old wife, Lucy Landry, when he was 64 years old. The next day, the judge imposed the sentence. He strongly condemned Harold's actions, calling them indescribable and unforgivable. The judge rejected Harold's claims that Lucy may have provoked him, seeing them as a desperate attempt to avoid blame. As a result, Harold received a life sentence with a minimum term of 16 years, before being eligible for parole. By the time he would be eligible, he would be over 80 years old. Lucy's loved ones expressed gratitude, not only for the resolution of the case, but also for the judge's comments, which they felt accurately reflected their own emotions. They acknowledged that the sentence brought some sense of relief from their pain, although they recognized that no length of sentence could restore Lucy's life, and they would need to come to terms with this difficult reality. Harold, on the other hand, maintained his claim of innocence, stating that he hoped to appeal the sentence in the future. Kim Wall was born on March 23, 1987, in Trollberg, Sweden. She was born to Joachim and Ingrid Wall, who were journalists. She had just one sibling named Tom Wall. Kim grew up to be a very bright child, who always stayed dedicated to her goals. She studied international relations at the London School of Economics and excelled, but it didn't end there. Kim took her education a step further by attending Columbia University's School of Journalism, described as the Oxbridge of Journalism, for a master's degree. Within her peers was at the top of the class, and she received honors in her year. Kim was very interested in people and their stories, and this attribute reflected in the way she worked as a journalist. Kim would go to any length to tell people's stories and make their voices heard. Kim worked in Australia as a reporter for the Swedish Embassy, as a journalist at South China Morning Post in Hong Kong, and also worked for a European Union delegation in India. Her works were published in many international publications, including the BBC, The Guardian, and the New York Times. Although Kim shuffled between New York and Beijing, she spent most of her time in Copenhagen, where she lived with her boyfriend, a landstub, a game and interaction designer. The two were deeply in love and had great plans together. One of the plans they had was to relocate to Beijing, China, but life had its own plans. On August 9, 2017, was at her parents' house in Trelleborg, Sweden, spending time with her family, so they could take their yearly summer picture. Her family had taken a family portrait every summer since Kim was a year old, which means they had 29 pictures before August 9, 2017. Kim was also eager to see Yule, so she was in a hurry to leave for Copenhagen. Kim and Yule had plans to host their friends at their apartment the following day to say goodbye before they left for China on August 16, 2017. Kim's mother, Ingrid, knew Kim's presence was an opportunity to take the family picture, so she made sure they took the picture before she left, even though Kim's brother, Tom, was sleepy because he had worked a night shift the previous day. Unbeknownst to them, that would be the last picture they would all take together. On August 10, 2017, Uli and Kim readied their home for the house party. Soon friends gathered at their apartment, but before the merriment could begin, Kim got a call. The call was from Peter Madsen, a Danish inventor who built submarines. Peter and Kim had spoken on the phone briefly in the past about an interview. Kim wanted to interview Peter for a Wired magazine article she was writing. It was meant to be a very short interview to end her report, so she told Uli to let her be excused. Before the party started, Kim wanted to get the work done as soon as possible and get back to partying with her friends before it got too late. Kim apologized to her friends who were already gathered for the party and left for the interview. Peter Madsen was a well-known inventor who created 3 submarines. Not only that, but he had also built rocket ships and inspired a lot of people with his projects. Since the interview was about Peter's inventions, he invited Kim to ride with him on the UC-3 Nautilus, his submarine that was launched in 2008. Kim had a safe ride to the Copenhagen harbor, where Peter asked that they meet. By around 7 p.m., Kim was there. Peter was already waiting for her on the submarine, and Kim, who was initially scared to go on the submarine, found her courage and climbed gently onto it. By the time the gentle wind floated around her while standing by Peter on the tower of the submarine, she realized it wasn't a big deal. At 8 p.m., she texted Yule, "I'm still alive, by the way." She also texted Yule, "I love you, but I'm going down now." Not long after that text, you'll received another text from Kim that reads, "He bought cookies and coffee though." Although that was the last text from Kim, Yul didn't think there was a problem since he expected Kim to focus on her work. But soon, Yul started to get worried. Kim was supposed to be back early as promised, but it began to get later and later. When Lul cannot reach Kim around 10 p.m., he started to panic. After calling everyone he could think of, he contacted the police at 1:43 a.m. and told them his girlfriend was missing. The Danish police began the search for Kim Wall, who was reported missing. They searched for the UC-3 Nautilus, the submarine that she boarded, before she went missing. But Kim was not found. The members of the Danish Emergency Management Agency, DMA, assisted the police in the search of the sea. All through the night, they searched far and wide, looking for Kim. The divers covered a large dark part of the sea, going front, back, right, left, center, and deep into the sea, while also using cadaver dogs. Around 5:31 a.m. on August 11, 2017, Kim's mother Ingrid got a call from Yul, who told her that Kim was missing. Both Ingrid and Joaquin panicked and could only hope that Kim was alive somewhere. The rigorous search continued, but the police would not find anything until around 10:30 p.m. At that time, a rescue helicopter found the sub in a bay southeast of Amager, near the Drogden Lighthouse, at a depth of 22 feet south of Copenhagen. The police also found Peter Metzen, but Kim was nowhere to be found. Peter told the reporters that were present at the search that the submarine sank due to a faulty ballast tank. He also said he saw a fisherman's boat nearby and he swam to the boat to escape. Peter's story never mentioned Kim, so the police questioned him about Kim's whereabouts. He said he dropped Kim off at a nearby restaurant on the night of August 10, 2017, before the accident. The police lifted the submarine for inspection, and they discovered something suspicious. They discovered that the faulty ballast tank was tampered with on purpose. They also looked inside the submarine, and they found traces of Kim's blood and her personal belongings. They questioned Peter more, and he changed his story. He told the police that there was an accident when he lost his grip on a heavy hatch door that fell and hit Kim's head. Peter said there was so much blood where Kim landed and that she had no pulse when he checked. The police knew immediately that they had to suspect Peter, but on what grounds? There was nothing tangible to hold on to. They were not even sure what really happened to Kim since her body had not been found. 11 days after Kim Wall went missing, on August 21, 2017, a cyclist while riding across a beach south of Copenhagen made a grisly discovery. It was a human torso washed up onto the shore. The police department was called, and after examining the torso, they determined it belonged to Kim Wall, the Swedish journalist that had been missing for 11 days. The torso had been stabbed about 14 times in a horrific manner, and the rest of the body was not attached to it. Friends and family of Kim Wall then knew that their beloved is no more, but they still needed answers as to what happened to her on August 10, 2017. The police kept searching for answers but found nothing until October 7, 2017, when divers found plastic bags in Koji Bay, less than a mile away from where Kim's torso was found. The plastic bags had metal scraps attached to them to prevent them from floating, and when the bags were opened, they contained Kim's head and legs. Peter was confronted again after these findings, and he changed his story again. This time he said Kim Wall died from toxic fumes while on his submarine. With Peter's conflicting stories, the police knew that he was hiding something. He also remained the only suspect in the case, as he was the last person that saw Kim alive, and he was also unable to provide clear details of what happened when they were together. Since Peter never confessed to Kim's murder, and there was no real evidence to hold anyone for it, no one was arrested. However, the police could not work based on their assumptions, so they proceeded with their investigation. The autopsy on Kim's body revealed that there was no blunt trauma to her head, which contradicted one of Peter's stories about a hatch hitting her head. The autopsy also revealed that Kim was bound and stabbed. It also showed that she had asphyxia, which means she was either strangulated or stabbed in her throat. With this evidence, the police had reasons to take Peter in for further questioning. During the investigation, his phone was searched, and the investigators found out that Peter watched a video on August 9, 2017 that detailed a young woman in pain as she was slowly beheaded with a small knife. His search history also showed that he searched for how to erase all photos on the iPhone. The investigators also found videos on Peter's computer showing women being murdered. And witnesses came in to testify that Peter was seen watching videos of decapitation and practicing asphyxiation. According to the investigation, no traces of Peter's DNA was found on Kim's body, but traces of bodily fluids were found in the underpants, which were secured from Peter Madison after the arrest. Under questioning, Peter denied finding pleasure while he was with Kim. Peter was born on January 12, 1971, to Annie and Carl Madsen. He spent his early life in Sabe and Hong, Denmark. Annie was more than 30 years younger than Carl and had 3 other boys from 2 previous men. Allegedly, Carl abused his 3 stepsons, and Annie left the marriage when Peter was 6 years old, taking with her all of her children. Years later, Peter returned to live with his father, with whom he shared an interest in rockets. While in school, Peter took a great interest in rocket fuel while studying physics and chemistry. He developed his first large rocket and launched it on March 3, 1986. He built it in his father's workshop and modeled it after the American ICBM MX Peacekeeper. The rocket did well, reaching a height of 100 meters before crashing. Fortunately, no one was hurt. In 1990, when Peter was 18 years old, he lost his father, but he never stopped experimenting and consulting engineers. He also joined the Dansk Amateur Rocket Club, DARK Rocket Club in Copenhagen, but the other members gradually became disillusioned with him. DARK members claimed that saying his name would start the fire sprinkler system. He never finished any formal education, but took courses in welding and engineering to learn something about submarines. His enthusiasm yielded positive results as people, enterprises, and organizations saw promise in him and funded his lifestyle and work. He built 3 submarines, UC-1 Freya, UC-2 Kraka, and UC-3 Nautilus. The Nautilus was a privately built midget submarine launched on the 3rd of May 2008 in Copenhagen, Denmark. Constructed over 3 years, it cost approximately $200,000 to build. On May 1, 2008, Peter co-founded Copenhagen Suborbitals with Danish architect Christian von Bengtstein. In June 2014, he left the project. Peter was responsible for the launch systems, launch pad, and booster rocket engines. Peter was already popular with his inventions, and a good number of people took interest in him. Unknown to them that Peter was a different person on the inside, his true self was only exposed via Kim Wall's murder. On January 26, 2018, 47-year-old Peter Madsen was charged with murder, indecent handling of a corpse due to the dismemberment, and assault due to the stabbing. The prosecution accused Peter of binding, hitting, cutting, and strangling Kim on his submarine on August 10, 2017. Peter did not admit that he had killed Kim throughout the investigation. On March 8, 2018, Peter's trial began and he pleaded not guilty to the charges. The psychiatric evaluation showed that Peter was a narcissistic psychopath, but not delusional or psychotic. On April 25, 2018, Peter was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment. Peter was reported to have shown no remorse while in court. Instead, he occasionally stared at people in the courtroom to intimidate them. At one point, the Wuff family was asked not to pass Peter in the courtroom because of the way he acted. While Peter admitted to dismembering Kim's body, he told the court, "Don't see how that mattered at the time, as she was dead." He maintained throughout the proceedings that her death was accidental. Even if Peter failed to confess, this sentencing brought closure to the family and friends of Kim, who never believed that she would be killed in a very close location to where she lived. They all knew Kim to be a brave journalist that was not afraid to go to dangerous places to get the information she needed for her work. If they ever worried about her, it would be because she traveled far and wide to work. Unbeknownst to them all, Kim would meet her untimely death in Copenhagen, the city where she lived. After Peter was sentenced to life imprisonment, he tried to appeal the sentence, but it wasn't granted. His wife, who he got married to in 2011, divorced him after he was arrested and asked that her identity be kept from the public. In August 2018, he was also attacked by an 18-year-old inmate, which had him hospitalized, with the fear of staying in jail all his life. He escaped on October 20, 2020, by threatening prison staff with a fake gun and fake explosives he had made while inside prison. The police chased after him and surrounded him in a nearby residential area not far from Herzeovester prison. But the police could not move closer to him because the police thought he was armed with explosives. The bomb experts were summoned and the police waited till they arrived. When the experts got there, they found out that it was all a decoy. Then the police arrested him and took him back to the prison. For that offense, he had to go to court again, and on February 9, 2021, a Copenhagen court sentenced him to an additional 21-month prison sentence for trying to escape. Although Peter was already serving life imprisonment, it looked like the extra sentence would not affect his jail term. The additional sentence would play a role if a probation request were ever made. Peter maintained his innocence throughout the case, claiming that death was an accident. But in a documentary series, while Peter Madison was secretly recorded, he reportedly confessed. According to the Danish newspaper, Ekstra Bladet, the series was based on more than 20 hours of telephone interviews with Peter from prison, which were taped without his knowledge. In one recording, when asked if he murdered Kim, he responds, "Yes." He also said, "There is only one who is guilty, and that is me." 3 years after Kim had been murdered, her parents Joachim and Ingrid, who were also journalists, were determined to put out their daughter's story. They found writing Kim's story therapeutic and determined that the story would not reflect the moments of her death, but instead the person that Kim's family, friends, sources, and readers knew her to be. Ingrid says, "The book is our way of telling the world who Kim was. A daughter, a journalist, and a human being." The book is titled A Silenced Voice, which is a tapestry of past and present, at once a joyful chronicling of a life well lived and a family's reckoning with a life being extinguished. It follows Kim as she leaps from London to Cuba, New York to Haiti, and Beijing to Sri Lanka, collecting stories, bylines, and beloved friends as she goes. It also traces the hours, days, and weeks after Ingrid and Joaquin woke up to the news that their daughter is missing and learned from the television that a stranger is being charged for the murder. Another thing that brought relief to the Wall family was the creation of the Kim Wall Memorial Fund, a grant created to support female journalists. Apart from the story written by Kim's parents, there were different TV presentations used to portray the life and death of Kim Wall. First is The Investigation, a Danish-language television dramatization created by Tobias Lindholm, which shows the criminal investigation of the case. It is a 6-part series that premiered on September 28, 2020, featuring different professional actors. The series was carefully scripted by engaging those involved in the investigation of the case. The investigation does not feature Peter or the crime itself, but focuses on the investigative work leading to his indictment and conviction. In September 2022, Netflix released a film titled Into the Deep, the Submarine Murder Case. Directed by Emma Sullivan, this film detailed the incident as well as covered the life of Peter Madsen, using the documentary footage of Peter, his friends and interns that was being filmed to document his quest to launch a rocket ship into space, using his submarine as a command center. Ulstubb, Kim's boyfriend, found it difficult to comment after the death of his beloved. But years after, he spoke about Kim and emphasized how much of a good human she was. In the quiet town of Homosassa, Florida, a young girl named Jessica Marie Lunsford was abducted from her home in the middle of the night. She was just 9 years old, full of innocence and dreams for the future. Her abduction sent shockwaves through the community and exposed a grave failure in the system meant to protect children. As news of Jessica's disappearance spread, a massive search effort was launched. Law enforcement, volunteers, and concerned citizens thoroughly searched the area, desperately hoping to bring her back safely. Jessica's family and friends, filled with anguish and fear, clung to hope while recounting stories of her contagious laughter, vibrant personality, and the joy she had brought into their lives. Days had passed, turning into weeks, and the search grew more intense. The tragedy of Jessica's disappearance highlighted the importance of community vigilance and the need for swift action in cases involving missing children. Law enforcement agencies worked tirelessly to uncover the truth, following leads and leaving no stone unturned. Their dedication to finding Jessica and bringing those responsible to justice became paramount. This is the story of Jessica Marie Lunsford, a young girl whose life was tragically cut short, but whose memory continues to inspire change. Jessica Marie Lunsford was born on October 6, 1995 and lived most of her life in North Carolina with her parents, Mark and Angela. When she was born, she had a few older teenage siblings. She was considered a miracle baby as her mother Angela had suffered a few miscarriages before her birth. However, her parents divorced a year after she was born and her father was granted full custody. For most of her life, she was the only child living with her father, and the two were very close like best friends. Mark worked in construction and sometimes couldn't afford a babysitter, so he would bring his daughter to work with him. She would hang out, talk to his coworkers, and play with wood chips, and everyone loved her. Eventually, her grandparents moved to Homosassa, Florida to be with them. They would go shopping and play games together. They would also take her out and go to karaoke as Jessica wanted to be a musician. She was inspired by her two favorite artists, Pink and Shania Twain. Her career interests changed frequently because she loved to do many things, including acting and working in fashion. Her dream of working in fashion was inspired by her grandmother, who often took her shopping to fabric stores and also sewed clothes for her dolls. Jessica was an outgoing, affectionate, and friendly girl who loved hugs and cuddling and treated everyone with love and kindness. One day, when Jessica was 9 years old, her father had a date with a woman he had not dated since his divorce from Angela, so he was very happy about it. He left Jessica with her grandparents, who would put her to bed when he wasn't home. He went out to meet his date and ended up staying the night at her house. When he showed up the following morning to take Jessica to school, he heard Jessica's alarm ringing and was surprised that she hadn't shut it off yet. He then went to her room and found her bed empty. Her school clothes were untouched. She was nowhere in the house and she wasn't outside. That's when he realized he had forgotten to lock the door after he had left. Mark became anxious and contacted the police to report that Jessica was missing. After finishing the call, he reached out to every person he knew and inquired if they had seen or heard from her. Her grandparents had not seen her since they had put her to bed, and her grandfather did not check on her when he woke up at 3 a.m. to use the bathroom. The police issued a nationwide alert about the missing 9-year-old girl and received assistance from 100 people who went out to search for her. The police asked if it was possible that she had run away to look for her mother, whom she had not seen for 4 years. But Mark said she would never do that. She would never just go off searching for her mother. And besides, her mother lived in a different state. Police tried to rule out every possible scenario before assuming it was an abduction case. They also asked if she might have engaged in any online conversations with strangers. As this was the early 2000s, when online chat rooms and the associated dangers were becoming a new problem. Mark said no. She's 9 years old and does not participate in any of that online internet activity. Mark also noticed that a purple dolphin stuffed animal, which he had one for Jessica at a fair just a few weeks earlier and which Jessica loved, was missing. This led the police to confirm that it was most likely a case of abduction. Police accessed the sex offender registry and conducted a search for all sex offenders and pedophiles in the area, performing door-to-door interviews to gather information, check for any suspicious activity, and obtain alibis. The investigators had a significant task ahead of them as their registry search identified 208 sex offenders they needed to look into. Mark and Jessica's grandfather were questioned and considered possible suspects. It was distressing for them to sit through 3 days of repeated interrogation and questioning about whether they were involved in Jessica's disappearance, if they had harmed her, given her away, or were in any way responsible. They were deeply concerned, as they cared greatly for Jessica. Her father was her closest friend, and her grandfather adored her. Being treated as suspects was heartbreaking. They both underwent polygraph tests, which they passed even though such tests are not entirely reliable and are not admissible as evidence in court. Angela had not seen her daughter in years and had even remarried and had a child. She had not heard anything about Jessica missing. The police were running out of leads and everything had started to feel hopeless, until they visited the home of 46-year-old John Cooey, one of the sex offenders. John Cooey was a dangerous man who had several convictions, including a dozen robbery charges, and was also a registered sex offender. During the investigation, He had an outstanding warrant for his arrest for being in possession of cannabis. When the police went to his home, they found out that he had relocated without informing the police, which is a federal violation. Sex offenders are required to inform the police whenever they relocate, so that the information can be updated in the sex offender registry. With a few family members, the police went to the trailer where John's sister lived. His sister informed the police that he was living with them, but she was not sure where he was at the moment. Nevertheless, what the police did not know was that they were just a few feet away from Jessica at that time, while she was still alive. During the period, they were questioning John's family concerning his whereabouts. The police entered the house and looked through some doors, but they were not allowed to search further at that moment. The frightened young girl was sitting in the dark closet of John's bedroom, not making any noise, as she was instructed by him to remain quiet and stay in the closet regardless of what occurred. It is unfortunate that Jessica was very close to being rescued. If only the closet door had been opened after the weekend when Jessica had first gone missing. Police came to check on John once again. His niece had given him money for a bus ticket, but didn't know where he was going. John was a prime suspect, as he had been running away just a few days after Jessica had originally gone missing, which raised red flags for the police, along with the fact that his sister's trailer was located around 100 yards away from Jessica's home. They finally found John at a homeless shelter, where he had used his real name to sign in. He told the police he was there to find work. He was questioned about Jessica, but claimed he had no idea what happened to the girl and had never known of her existence until he saw the news. The police had to release him at that particular time, as they had no grounds to hold him. They released him on March 12th, a few weeks after Jessica had gone missing. The officers later obtained a search warrant to look through his sister's trailer. In his bedroom, inside his closet, the police found a mattress with blood stains. DNA testing on the mattress matched that of Jessica's. John was immediately arrested and charged with the kidnapping and murder of Jessica Lansford. On March 18, 2005, John Cooey made a confession to the police. He had initially intended to break in and rob the home, but he made too much noise and Jessica woke up and saw him. Panicked, he was afraid that she would inform on him as she had seen his face. Without thinking, he grabbed her and put his hand over her mouth, telling her not to scream. He informed her that she had to go with him, but before leaving, she requested if she could get her preferred stuffed animal, which he agreed to. She returned with the purple dolphins that her father had won for her at the fair. Once they reached his home, he sexually assaulted her and told her to stay in his bed and not leave the room, and they fell asleep. The following morning, he sexually assaulted her again, instructing her not to make any noise and never come out under any circumstances, as there would be negative consequences if she did. Then he left for work. When he returned home, he discovered that the police were asking questions and knew he had to take action. He was unsure whether to let her go back home because he feared returning to prison. Instead, when the house was empty, he sexually assaulted Jessica one last time and told her he would take her back home to her father, but she had to comply with his demands. He opened 2 large plastic garbage bags and told her to get inside, along with her stuffed animal. He informed her that he would drop her off at her house and she could break free from the bags. However, he dug a hole approximately 3 feet deep, buried her alive, and then escaped. It was very sad because John would have been caught digging a hole and placing her body inside it if the view wasn't completely blocked off by a giant tent that the police put up near Jessica's home in case something happened and they were needed right away. This had the opposite effect. Jessica could have been saved, but the chance was gone. After retrieving the body from the ground, the medical examiner discovered that Jessica had used her last breath of strength to try and free herself by poking 2 of her fingers through the plastic bags, and her 2 fingers were skeletonized. The medical examiner said that she had run out of air and suffocated after roughly 1 to 3 minutes of being on the ground, and the rest of the body had averaged to severe decomposition. Initially, the judge had ruled that John's confession would be inadmissible in court, as he confessed without his lawyer present. However, the trial court decided that all evidence gathered after the confession, including the discovery of the body, autopsy report, and incriminating statements made by him to investigators and a jail guard, would be admissible in court. John's trial had to be held in Miami, as they could not find an impartial jury in Homicassa. On March 7, 2007, John was found guilty of the following crimes: first-degree murder, kidnapping, assault or battery on a person, burglary, and sexual battery. He was sentenced to death, but on September 30, 2009, before his sentence could be carried out, he died of natural causes, approximately 2 years after murdering Jessica. Jessica's family, who endured unimaginable pain and grief, became advocates for stronger laws and measures to protect children. Their unwavering commitment to ensuring that no other family experiences such a tragedy is a testament to their love for Jessica. Jessica will be remembered as a sociable, caring, and warm-hearted girl who loved hugs and embraced and treated everyone with love and generosity. Jessica's story sparked a nationwide conversation about the safety of our children, prompting communities to come together, demanding reforms and raising awareness about the importance of protecting and cherishing every child. The investigation into Jessica's abduction led to changes in legislation, ensuring that sex offenders are closely monitored and that law enforcement agencies have the necessary tools to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. As we remember Jessica, we honor her memory by continuing to work towards a world where every child can grow up in safety and security. Her spirit lives on through the actions and advocacy of those inspired by her story. In the end, Jessica Marie Lunsford's legacy will serve as a powerful reminder that we must remain vigilant in protecting our children. May her memory inspire us to create a society where every child can thrive free from harm. Corpus Christi resident Kevin Davis strangled his mother before hitting her in the head with a hammer, splitting her skull. Davis then swirled her brain around before sexually assaulting her corpse. Davis was sentenced to life in prison for the crime of a mom who he described as the best. In 2014, Kevin Jasrell Davis argued with his mother, 50-year-old Kimberly Hill, in the Corpus Christi, Texas apartment he shared with her and his sister, Destiny. On May 26th, Davis called 911, reporting that he'd just murdered his mother. Once at the police station, an 18-year-old Davis vividly detailed the day's events, sometimes with a smirk on his face. What he told detectives was gruesome and shocking. Kevin admitted bashing in Hill's head with a hammer, swirling her brain around, and then sexually assaulting her corpse. On the morning of March 27, 2014, Davis, bored and frustrated with life, told his mother he did not like people and that he wanted to commit suicide. Obviously caught off guard by the statement, allegedly told her son that she could not stop him if that was what he wanted to do. Kevin later told police hearing this from his mother enraged him. It was then he decided to take her life. As Hill sat on the couch in the living room, Davis came up behind her, attempting to strangle her with a cord. Hill began screaming. Kevin panicked, retreated a hammer, and began bashing in his mother's skull. Davis struck his mother in the head with the hammer at least 20 times, splitting her skull in the process. Davis then retreated a kitchen knife that he inserted inside his mother's head wound. He swirled her brain around to make sure she was dead, Kevin claimed, and then inserted his hand inside the wound. He would tell detectives during a taped interrogation that his mother's brain felt like putty. Kevin then dragged his mother's lifeless body to her bedroom and raped her corpse. When he finished the sadistic act, he went to a neighbor's house, saying he just killed someone and needed help. The neighbor dialed 911. Police arrested Davis without incident. At the police station, he made a full confession of the crime, giving details that even seasoned detectives found highly disturbing. Watch part of Kevin Davis's confession. During the interrogation, Davis told detectives that he originally planned on killing his sister, too, but changed his mind. He further admitted that he often fantasized about having sex with dead bodies. With a smirk on his face, Kevin also told the detective that he was a virgin before he raped his mother. He stated, "I guess I've lost my virginity to a corpse," as he gently laughed. What did Kimberly Hill do to warrant such a violent death? Nothing more in the son murdering and sexually assaulting his mother, of course, and Kevin could not give detectives one good reason for the crime. According to Kevin, she was a great mom that did not deserve what he had done to her. He said that she was the best mother in the world and went on to say, "I am a terrible, disgusting person." Kevin admitted that he had the best mother in the world, telling detectives that she did nothing to deserve what was done to her. He went on to say that he was a terrible, disgusting person. In reality, Kevin was a serial killer in the making, a psychopath who took sadistic pleasure in hurting other people. Although diagnosed by a psychologist with antisocial personality disorder, the doctor said he knew right from wrong when he provably murdered and raped his mother. He readily admitted that he would till again if ever released from prison. He also confessed to then fleeing the crime scene on his bicycle. Before he did that, though, he left several handwritten notes for the police, one of which read, "Chase me. Sorry for the mess. KD." But after a while, he decided against leaving town and called 911 to report his mother's killing and his crimes. Despite admitting to the murder and making a videotaped confession, Kevin Davis pleaded not guilty to the charges in court. He later changed the plea. Davis smiled at the jury as they sentenced him to life in prison. He serves his time at the Jester 4 facility in Richmond, Texas, and is eligible for parole in March 2044. Story number 2, Story of the Killer Priest. We will be exploring the story of a killer, a priest that seemed to be normal, nothing strange or nothing weird about him. However, he did have a dark side. It turns out that not only was he a pervert, but he was manipulating people as he saw fit, especially women. And now, without further ado, let's dive into the story of Gore, who going back in time in the 50s in France. And we need to take note that the church at that time had a very important place in people's lives. Especially in the countryside, the priests were almost as important as the mayors because they were representing a type of moral authority that many people listened to. And this was the case in the small village of Europe where this story took place. A town that had about 400 villagers. Gore was born on the countryside and his family was very Catholic. They raised him so that he can have a career in religion as a priest. And even if that was not his first choice, that is exactly what he became. It is in 1950 that Guy became a priest at the Church of Europe in appearance. This young man looked like the ideal priest. He was nice, friendly, kind, and very dynamic. Anything linked to religion, he did it very, very well. He had a lot of great ideas to help the village grow. He created a choir, a group to play in a theater piece. He did organize multiple excursions for the kids, and he was known to have created a soccer team for the boys of the village. The older people thought that it was very modern for him to bring all these items to the village. And the younger generation thought it was pretty amazing and appreciated the modern aspect that he brought to the town and to the religion. Dewar was apparently also a beautiful man, and the ladies found him very charming. Now, as I have mentioned at the beginning, underneath this whole angelic disguise Guy was actually hiding a dark secret. His personality, he had a thirst for colal pleasure, and he was using his charm to get closer to the ladies. After a lot of perversity and manipulation, a lot of the women actually gave in, and none of the women spoke as they were afraid that no one would believe them and did not want to be seen as the shame of the village. It is in 1953 that things took a different turn for Guy Dyer, and an incident happened that changed the plan of the priest. A girl fell for his charm, and guess what happened? She became pregnant. Now, of course, the priest denies everything, and he says that he is not the father, threatens the girl, and says that if she does not stop, he will file a complaint for defamation. Now, having an eye influence in the village, Guy says that this is nonsense and it is impossible for him to be the father. And of course, having such an high influence, his followers believed him. He was even summoned in front of his superior, the bishop, to which he lied to you and denied the whole thing. And of course, this whole situation was shut down in reality. He was actually the father, and he actually took the girl to another village to give birth, where he convinced her to give away the child. And of course, that story was never heard of or told to the villagers, or we could say maybe presume that if people knew, they decided not to say anything, because the priests had such a high influence on the villagers that they did not want to go against him once the story died. Guy went back to his normal ways and kept manipulating the people like he did before. But there was another incident in 1956. Renee Faye's 19 years of age got pregnant, and again by Guy Dyer. Contrary to the other women, Renee did not want to give away her child for adoption. Not only that, but she wanted to raise him in the village of the Uruf, where the priest Guy was terrified. And he was afraid that eventually the child would grow up and resemble him. He was also afraid that this woman would actually speak, eventually speaking of which in 1956, rumors started to make surface. A lot of parishioners were becoming pregnant in mysterious ways, and no one knew who the father was. The priest then starts to think about a plan and ask a military man from another village to come to town and pretend that he was the father. Unfortunately, that strategy did not work out, and no one believed the soldier was the father. That only made things worse for the mysterious pregnancies. December 3rd, 1956 is a date that changed everything. For the priest, Kai brings Rain in on a deserted road to try and convince her one more time to give up the child. She refuses again, and she was tired of the priest's request. So you know what she did. She got out of the car and started to walk back the opposite way back to the village. At night, Guy Deere got out of the car and pulled out a 6.35 caliber pistol and fired 3 shots. The 3 shot hit Regine in the back of the neck, and she died on the spot. Once the crime committed, the priest walked to the victim, entrusted her, and took out a knife and started to open Regine's stomach. From her stomach, he removed the baby girl that was still alive. The priest remitted again, an act that cannot be forgiven. He strangled the baby, stabbed it, disfigured it, and he did all the thinking to himself that if the baby is massacred that way, there would be no DNA, if you want to call it that way, no DNA to trace the baby back to him. The disappearance of Regine was actually reported in the evening, and the weird part is that the priest joined the search party to find the Regine. Can you imagine that situation? I mean, the killer is with you in the search party trying to find the person that he just murdered. Is it just me, or that is just like twisted? The body was found very quickly, and because the priest was not an assassin, he didn't think about cleaning up the crime scene, so it didn't take long for the cops to find the murder weapon, and they found the weapon casing that linked back to the priest. So the priest is now a suspect, and when asked during the interrogation, the priest denied everything. However, because of all the pressure he was getting, he just cracked and admitted everything. Now that story came out and everyone was devastated in France because he is now a criminal, and the church asked for to be locked up with a false name so that it would not affect the church. And also the main reason was to make sure that the crime was not associated to the church. The court addressed the case of Guy de Noyer on January 24, 1958. Of course, the villagers and the public opinion wanted the priest to be sentenced to death. The life of Guy was defined as a person that did enjoy luxury, sexual relations, and admired his own authority. And on his side, the priest was asking forgiveness because he had no clue what he did wrong. The jury did provide their verdict, and for most, they said that he was guilty of double murder. Of course, there was Regine and the baby. However, they did not want to sentence him to death. The jury did not want to send someone associated to the church to the scaffold. The priest, Guy de Noyer, was therefore sentenced to perpetrated work. Now that situation raised a lot of questions regarding the responsibility of the Catholic Church, and this is still a question that is being asked nowadays, especially for the priests who like other kids, if you know what I mean. There was an investigation that was done, and the report came up saying that the church knew the dark side that he was hiding before he was pronounced priest. His superiors noticed that he did not have a lot of faith and he was not really a believer in Catholic religion. The investigation did show that before being priest in Europe, he was sent to Blemet. While he was there, he did have a sexual relation with his parishioner, and instead of removing his status, they just transferred him to another city. Even there, his weakness for women did not stop, as he did have multiple sexual relations. You would think that the church would revoke his status, but instead he was just transferred to Europe, where the church was isolated and his temptations might be lower. But as we have seen, this was not the case. De Noyer was released in 1972 after being detained for 22 years. He was the oldest prisoner of France. Once again, the church came to his help after he was released from prison. He was welcomed in a monastery in Brittany, or he stayed there until he died on April 21, 2010 at 90 years of age. Now we go to story number 3. Family slaughtered at Wells Great Provincial Park. The tiller stalked the family while he let his violent fantasies run wild. 3 generations of a family left to go camping on August 2, 1982. They set up camp in the Welsh Great Provincial Park, located roughly 120 kilometers north of Kamloops in central British Columbia. They enjoyed several days of cloudy family time, picking berries during the day and gathering around the fire at night, having no idea that they were being stalked by a killer. Among the campers was grandparents Edith, 59, and George Bentley, aged 66, their daughter Jackie, 41, and son-in-law Bob Johnson, 44. Also the Johnsons' daughters Janet, 13, and Karen, just 11. The Johnsons drove up with their daughters and pitched a tent for the girls. The grandparents brought a truck and camper where the adults would stay. The last anyone heard from the family was on August 6th when Edith called another daughter. It would not be until August 23rd that the family would first be reported missing. Bob Johnson was due back at work on August 16th, but didn't show. After a week with no word from him, his company filed a missing persons tings with the police. In spite of an extensive search, it didn't result in finding any of the family members. The biggest problems were the tiller had a head start. With plenty of time to kill, get rid of the victims' bodies and cover his tracks. The other, maybe even bigger obstacle was no one knew exactly where the family was camping at. All anyone knew was that the family was camping in the Wells Gray area, which is massive. They had no idea where to even start, but alone being able to follow a trail to find the family. It would take 3 more weeks and a mushroom picker to find the family. On September 13th, the Corrin discovery of the Johnsons' 1979 Plymouth was found. It had been burned beyond recognition as it set off to the side of a mountainside logging road. The car held the bodies of the 4 adults in the back seat and the 2 young girls in the trunk. The bodies were burned so thoroughly that it came time to bury the family. They were all placed together in one child-sized casket. Through a forensic examination of the remains, it was determined they had been shot with a .22 caliber firearm. Locals were able to tell investigators where they had seen the family camped at. An examination of the area would turn up .22 casings, which helped identify the weapon used as a Remington pump-action rifle. What wasn't at the campsite was the truck and camper, the boat and camping gear brought with the family, or any trace of the family at all. With no suspect in custody or even in sight, the media was pushing for answers. A tip came in at the family's truck and camper had been spotted. The witnesses said it was being driven by 2 French Canadians in central Canada. The media sprang into action, throwing this up as their headline and demanding the killers to be caught. In April, with still no leave, the investigators knew they needed to get creative. They reenacted what they believed was the crime scene for TV cameras inherited across Canada. The next month, the police drove a replica Ford camper truck to Ontario and Quebec in an attempt to draw awareness for what people should be looking in a for. What it did instead was flood the investigators with over 13,000 tips and sightings of the replica vehicle. The reward was raised from $7,500 to $10,000 for information leading to the truck. None of the tips led to the discovery of the camper and truck. It would be found by sheer luck. 2 forestry employees were working on a logging road and stumbled across it. The camper had sat there on Trophy Mountain for 14 months, only a few kilometers away from the crime scene. The camper was burned out like the car holding the family's bodies. This left the authorities to believe they were looking for someone local to the Wells Gray area, and not 2 French Canadians as they had been searching for, since it was more likely that a local would know about the locking roads and the area in general. Taking a closer look at the person who lived closest to the crime scene led them back to David Rulian Shearing, 24. They have received a tip about him earlier in the investigation. When they followed up, the tipster had quite a bit to tell them. I hear earlier Shearing had asked him about re-registering a Ford truck and how to repair a hole in its door. This was a tip that the police had never divulged. After finding the truck, it had a bullet hole in the door. After an interrogation by the Royal Canadian Mote of Police, Shearing confessed. He went so far as reenacting the murders for the detectives. He turned over evidence that he had stolen from the family and the murder weapon, .22 caliber Remington rifle. The ballistic test would prove that this was the weapon used to kill the family. The same weapon that had been hanging on his walk the very first time the authorities went to ask him about the family, right after they had been reported missing. Maybe it was because his father was a prison guard or his brother was a sheriff. But Shearing wasn't suspected when first interviewed. In his confession, he gave details of how it all happened. He had first noticed the family when he set up camp, fixating on the 2 young girls. Then over the next few days, he watched their every move. On the night of August 10th, Shearing watched as the adults sat around the campfire and had seen the girls go into their tent for the night. From a distance, he took out the 4 adults with sniper shots. He said he then killed the 2 girls from their tent as they slept. After he said he loaded all the bodies into the car and moved it to the logging road, then set it on fire with 5 gallons of gasoline. He then cleaned up the campground, removing the family's possessions, including the camper and truck. It would only be later that he burned these, as he was unable to transfer them into his name. He claimed that he killed the family because he wanted to rob them of their possessions. It wouldn't be until after Shearing was convicted that he gave his full confession of how and he had been stalking the family. It was the girls that he fantasized about having sex with that kept him interested. That's why, after telling the adults, he kidnapped the girls and took them to his property nearby. There he raped and terrorized them for over a week. On August 16th, the day their father was due back at work, Shearing took Taryn away from her big sister. Once alone, he shot the girl in the back of the head. Janet would be left alive for one more day of torture before she would be killed like her sister. With the girls now dead, he took their bodies to the Johnsons' car where the other family members had been placed. He had actually only hidden the car in some bush. He put the girls in the trunk and got into the driver's seat with the 4 decomposing adult bodies in the back seat, driving it to its final resting place where it would be found by that mushroom pick for burnout. David Shearing pled guilty to 6 counts of murder. Shearing was sentenced to life in prison with no eligibility for parole for 25 years, the maximum penalty for second-degree murder. This would be the first time that this sentence was handed out in Canadian history. David Shearing, who changed his last name to his mother's maiden name of Ennis, was first eligible for parole in 2008. The National Parole Board ruled against his release, citing that he was still having violent sexual fantasies and had not completed his sex offender treatment program, so he was not ready to be released. Again in 2012, he was turned down for parole, applying again in 2014. But before his hearing, he withdrew his request. The National Parole Board has also been given a petition which has over 15,000 signatures, advocating for the violent offender to never be released. In his own words at one of his parole hearings, David tries to plead for freedom, saying this about himself: "I was very selfish. He is supported by his wife that he married while in prison." Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.